Hi, everyone. Welcome to week 9. So this week, we are mostly just focusing on getting our peer review done and getting those intervention arguments in. But I just really quickly wanted to show you a couple of things from the slideshow I added this week, just for those of you who might have questions about incorporating sources in the paper. One thing to keep in mind is this idea of patchwork plagiarism. So look, I highly encourage just quoting sources, especially if it's really hard to put the idea in your own words. But if you are putting someone's idea in your own words, just make sure that you're avoiding putting too many of their same words in a row. That's something that we call patchwork plagiarism. Whenever you use 3 words or more in a row from the original quote, then what we're really doing is we're just kind of picking and choosing rather than rephrasing the idea. Okay, we're picking and choosing words from the quote. If you're having trouble rephrasing something, go ahead and just quote the source. Especially for this paper, we only really have 2 sources, so it's going to be okay to use quotes. Another thing to try to avoid here is misrepresentation, which can sometimes happen with paraphrasing. And so just try to make sure that you understand what the author is saying, and that when you're representing that idea, you're not changing the meaning of the words when you're paraphrasing, right? Okay. One thing that I would suggest for this is trying to read a text as a whole before coming up with the rephrased idea. So for example, if I'm reading an AITA post, I might want to write down after each paragraph, I just write down the main idea of that paragraph, one sentence. Or maybe I read the whole post and then I try to write down, okay, well, what were the main arguments from their position or something like that. By writing those ideas down after I read the text as a whole, that at that point I understand the idea more clearly, but also I'm not looking directly at a certain sentence and then trying to put that into my own words. It's really hard when you're at the sentence level looking at individual words to figure out, okay, well, how would I put this in my own words? And sometimes getting a thesaurus out isn't really going to help that much, because what happens is we're looking at that sentence that's built a certain way, and just replacing those words with slightly different versions of the same word isn't necessarily going to be an adequate rephrasing, okay? All right. If you are going to be quoting, one thing to keep in mind is that there's a very particular way of quoting an MLA. You want to make sure that you have some sort of introduction to your quote like this, right? I've built it into the sentence, and then I just use quotation marks. I have the entire quote here, then I end the quotation, and then I have parenthetical citation. So I just use parentheses. This is the author's last name, end the parentheses, and then have my period here. I don't want to have any kind of comma or period before the parentheses. This is just going to be a blank space, one space after the quotation marks before I have parentheses, okay? Some of you might have been told to just put a citation at the end of a paragraph. That's something that people are taught to help them get practice with using citations in text. But at college level, we actually expect that you're citing at a sentence level. And so if you have a quote, you just want to make sure that you're always citing at the end of the sentence. There's another thing called dropped quotes. And basically what this means is that you have put a quote into your paper. It's like all of a sudden I'm reading your paragraph, it's all in your own words, and then all of a sudden I'm in a quote, okay? And there's been no introduction. So we can see it here. Let me make this a little bigger for us. It says, this little box. In the new Thor Ragnarok, Jeff Goldblum plays the Master of Ceremonies. And then we have here, period. Then we have start of a quote. So this is technically wrong. It's called a dropped quote. And the reason it's wrong is because our reader is like, where is this quote coming from? Who's speaking now? You don't want them to have that kind of confusion. You want to tell them, according to the film critic name inserted here, the worst thing I can say about him is blah, blah, blah. By the way, if you say the author's name in the sentence, then you don't need a parenthetical citation at the end if you don't have page numbers or if you're not using a date like an APA. And so you can just have a little bit of a sentence in front of that in your own words, introducing it somehow. And what we call these are signal phrases. So if I can go back to my slideshow. Okay. So what we do here is we'll say something like according to blank, and then this will be the author's name. Or a lot of times what it'll be is we'll just have the author's name or sources or critics or writers, or however when you want to identify the person who's speaking. And then we have a verb to describe just the action of communicating, right? So we can be more specific, we can be less specific, kind of depending on what angle it is that we're presenting this quote with, right? So maybe they conclude something when we're trying to say, you know, they've taken in evidence and here's their conclusion, or hypothesizes, they are trying to think of a hypothetical situation. And so here's a description of that. However you want to introduce that quote, you just want to explain to the reader who is speaking and kind of what are they doing while they're speaking here, okay? All right. Final thing that I wanted to tell you about is citations in MLA. I think we've talked about this before, but just in case, you always want to have the author come first. So with our paper for this one, we'll have, for the Reddit post, we'll just have a username here. But if you do have a last name, that's going to go first, comma, first name. Then you'll have the title of the article. Again, with Reddit, it's going to be, and in these quotes, it'll say AITA probably, AITA for, and then a description. So it's going to be that question that's at the top of the Reddit post. Then you'll have Reddit in italics here, the day, the month, and the year. So for example, today's the 18th, so it'd be 18 oct period, and then 2023, and then a comma, and then the URL. Okay, you don't need an access date, at least not for this paper. We're just going to get some practice making sure that we have citation correctly. Another little last detail here is that you want to make sure that you have hanging indents on your works cited page. I'm not sure how much you've had practice with doing hanging indents, but basically what you want to do for this, let me pull up